Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. I'm testing a new headset mic set because I guess the future is happening and I need to, change up how I'm doing things. So if anyone is having any complications hearing me, let me know so that I can write some reviews for this mic now so that I can make it clear for everyone and we can have the best time here today. So I had a chance to speak with our guest speaker just a little bit offline, and I know she's going to drop a lot of knowledge today. So before we get started, just want to go over some quick housekeeping rules so that we all feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. Lots of crazy things going on in the world. You could be doing anything else, but you're deciding to spend the hour with us. So would love your presence, would love for you to participate, would love for you to be mindful in this conversation. So turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. Hop off mute whenever you have something you want to say. Use the chat box at your leisure. You can write any dreams or any anecdotes or, self-promote anything you've got going on. We'd love to support you at this time. If you do hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording as this is being recorded. So let folks know they can watch the live stream on YouTube, on Power to Fly's channel on YouTube, or they can go to Power to Fly and watch this video here. For those of you joining us live, you will get a rewatch email with a link to all the resources that our guest speaker is speaking about today. So again, be present with us. You can rewatch this video and take notes vigorously there, but we would love for you to be present with us today. If you do hop off of mute, again, you'll be featured. If you want to be kept anonymous, I'd love for you to find me in the chat box, direct message me. You can find me under Mariella Marie, and I will keep your reflection or your question anonymous and flag that to our guest speaker because we would love to hear from you no matter what's going on in your life, no matter where you are. We would love to hear from you. So the last thing I'll say is that we'd love for you to follow us on socials so that you can stay in tune with all the great things we've got coming up. With that said, I'm just going to briefly introduce myself for those of you who have not been on a Chat and Learn before. I have the pleasure of picking the minds of beautiful folks throughout the week here at Power to Fly. So I'm really keen on social impact productions, and I would love for you all to support the project that I'm working on, thepositiveforceteam.org. You go there, you get our newsletter, and actually if you put the name of this chat in the network goodies promotion file, you'll be able to get some cool treats that we've got coming up from you later on, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. We'd love to chat with you there. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Jennifer. Let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to learn about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today, Jennifer.
Great. So my name is Jen. I'm currently the CEO of Shoot with two T's. I don't know if you want to pull up slide 6 there. I just put down the URL to that if you guys are interested in looking into that. Basically, just to give you a quick background, we are a female-run company that provides 30-minute free photo sessions for folks. Basically, we want to try to democratize the area of professional photography for everyday people so that we can all get our photos in, especially those of us who are families, who are children. We're oftentimes not the ones in front of the camera, but behind it. So really trying to, provide a product that brings a lot of joy and good time making memories for everybody and something to kind of hold on to for the future. In the same realm, we also started this company because we really wanted to really address the gig economy in terms of photographers and freelance artists and helping them really be able to do what they love while making, a good side hustle out of it, and then operating in a way that's, ethical with a lot of integrity and just really supporting that community altogether. Sorry, you might see some of my cats make a cameo here. So that's just a quick background of what I do during the day or what I do when I'm not on a call like this. I guess this is my first, thing with Power to Fly. I knew about Power to Fly before, just basically when we were looking for, other, female entrepreneurs and females in general to really connect with. And Power to Fly is obviously one of those places that's great for that. And then I think Nicole reached out to me over LinkedIn and we started chatting, and she said, hey, this might be a really, good opportunity for you to come on and just kind of share some of your own personal experience. I'm, in no way expert in any one thing, but I'm hoping that, some of my experiences, what I've learned, over the course of my journey will be helpful to other people and helping encourage everybody along their way of, finding their true self, finding their path, finding something they want to do that aligns with their values and they're passionate about. So that's really my goal. I'm really excited to be talking with all of you.
Yay. Well, thank you, Jen, so much for that beautiful introduction. And feel free to let us know more about the beautiful work that you're doing, and, how we can connect with you offline once we finish this
For sure.
conversation. But for now, I'd love for you to talk about some of the principal themes that you're going to cover in the next hour.
Okay, great. So I think mainly all these kind of flow together, and they're very very dense subjects, I would say, and probably would say the most overarching sort of subject probably would be in that first bubble there, leveraging your emotions to find objectivity. And I think a more simple way to state that is really talking about kind of self-awareness and kind of really understanding who we are as people, so that when we do face challenges or we do face difficult decisions, whether in our personal lives or in our career paths, and making pivotal decisions especially, we know how to make them in a way that we're confident about, right? And even if we're not 100% sure, we feel good about it or at peace with it, because we know it aligns with who we are and who we want to be. So I think that's a really big thing that really kind of guides everything else we do in life in general. And it also kind of flows into the other 2 points here, which is making decisions and assessing risk, which is a little bit more cut and dry. But again, it has to do with it kind of flows along with really knowing ourselves, really knowing when to be brave and all that. Adapting and pivoting while staying focused, again, that kind of comes along with it. When we do face instances where we have to make decisions and we have to adapt because things aren't working the way we want, or we're kind of feeling off base or whatnot, that really helps us to be able to do so in a way that's, hopefully we can do it as gracefully as possible, and with as much wisdom as possible, so we can proceed with courage and proceed with confidence.
Absolutely. And I love speaking about emotional intelligence and the importance
Mhm.
of emotional intelligence. So you're just setting off a lot of neurons here, just in that beautiful introduction. So feel free to philosophize with me whenever you want about, how we can strengthen our emotional intelligence and
For
practice
sure.
it individually and also in the workplace, because hopefully, real impact can be made when we are more, you know, um, confident in ourselves, we're more
Mhm.
self-aware, which is the first pillar of emotional intelligence, and we can use empathy, and we know how to make these huge decisions that can affect, that has this ripple effect, and it doesn't just have its consequences or rewards on an individual level, but we are interconnected beings. So I
Mhm.
love that you have at this high level introduction is that we're all connected, and how can we be our true selves so that we can thrive. So thank you for that, Jen.
Great.
I know you have this beautiful quote here that you want to share before we jump into the questions.
Yeah, just I think really quickly, and I think that this will probably I probably will refer to this during the our conversations, but this is a quote I just wanted to share that I actually was first introduced to it in fourth grade, and it has stuck with me all throughout my whole life, because it just really struck me, because I think they simplified a little bit at the time in saying that every decision we make and everything that we do takes us one step closer to being a certain type of person, which is ultimately what this, more eloquently stated here. In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves, right? The process never ends until we die. And the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility. And I love it because it, in a way, made me feel very empowered that there's something I can do about it. It's not like we're given a set of situations and circumstances, but I'm not necessarily stuck in that. It's not like life has already determined what kind of life I'm going to have or who I'm going to be. So that's one thing I love about it. And the last part of this quote I really love too, is that it really puts the onus on us in terms of like, we can take that responsibility on ourselves, to make certain choices. I think sometimes, obviously there are exceptions here and there, but for the most part, we may be victims of certain things, but we don't have to stay in that space. So ultimately we can make that decision, we can take that control back, and everything we do is on us. Like, we have that power. So that's why I love this quote, and I hope maybe it'll impact someone as much as it has done for me.
Yes, thank you for sharing that quote, and I love that it's stuck with you for so long, and so I think it's definitely important, and timely to start off the conversation in this way. So I'm gonna stop sharing our screen so that we can have some FaceTime here, and I just also want to shout out where we are calling from, so you can keep this in mind as you are diving into the questions here. So again, our guest speaker Jen is calling from New York. I'm calling from Argentina. We've got California representing, Seattle, Washington, DC, Kentucky, Arizona. Arizona, California, Virginia. Great. So if you're just joining us, you can drop in the chat box. Let us know where you are in the world. Would love to give you a shout out. And then anything you want our guest speaker to know about yourself. So there will be times when I ask if folks want to hop off mute, but at any point you can write things in the chat box so that Jen can dive in deeper here as she's answering these awesome questions that you'll have submitted offline. Let's start with this first question here. So how do we identify what our true self looks like? I tried so hard to fit in that I can't really tell who I am.
Great. That's an awesome question. I think before I really dive into this, I think I should have probably introduced this in the beginning. Along with emotional intelligence, one thing some of you guys might know about this already is the Enneagram test. The Enneagram test, basically, it's like 9 different types that they, really delve in to kind of analyze us in terms of psychology. And we use this all the time at work, and we love it because unlike some of the other sort of personality tests, it really dives into sort of the things that really drive you, what you're anxious about, sort of your key things that might motivate you, right? And the neat thing about it is it's not just a personality test. It also gives you sort of a rundown of like, when you're at your healthiest, what does that look like? And what is your natural tendency? And it's particularly useful because, as you know, when it comes to self-awareness, we're not always right about ourselves a lot of times. Like we sometimes, the persona we put on is just our persona, and it can be really shaped by, our past trauma or sort of our coping mechanisms that we've picked up along the way to just survive, which is nothing wrong with that, right? But sometimes we have to dive a little bit deeper. And sometimes having something like the Enneagram test is a great tool to help us sort of look into ourselves a little bit more and try to kind of separate those things so we know exactly who we're dealing with within ourselves and what we're dealing with, what issues we're dealing with. So if you guys haven't done so already, definitely Google the Enneagram test and try to take it. It's very enlightening. I think the more honest you are with that, the more I think helpful it will be. So just to throw that out there in terms of emotional intelligence. And then I guess to get to the question, let's see, about what our true self looks like. And I think I heard, that this person's trying really hard to fit in, and then you kind of lose yourself along the way. And I can definitely relate to that because I think I often struggle with that also. So I will say that I think listening to that question, I think the thing that sticks out to me the most is the phrase of I tried so hard to fit in. So what I want to say to that is, your true self really isn't a stagnant state of being. It's really a state of perpetual evolution, right? Stemming from constant self-awareness. So it's not like, I think it's easy to confuse true self with higher self in terms of like your full potential, which is there, but your true self is sort of where you're at right now and where you're constantly shaping, right? And I do think the process of forming and shaping your true self leads to making more thoughtful and intentional decisions and actions. So, practically speaking, then when you're talking about fitting in, when you're finding yourself in a group setting and you're trying to fit in, such as like, this is what I usually do. You're trying to listen into people's conversations. I try to find an in to be like, oh, I can relate to that, yada, yada, yada. Or you're trying to, find a way to kind of make a comment like on a social post or a thread to kind of interject yourself. What I've been doing for myself, and I think this might be helpful too, is to go through what I call sort of the 5 steps, just to take a step back before jumping in and sort of reacting how I normally would, because that's my natural tendency. And the first step with that is, we can show the slide later. I did make a slide for this. Is the first thing is to kind of label what I'm feeling. So usually I take a step back and say, okay, what am I feeling now? Am I feeling excited that I want to be part of this group? Am I actually feeling anxious because for some reason, maybe I don't want to feel like I'm being left out? So I think it's important to kind of, this is where we leverage our emotions, right? To really start thinking about like, what am I actually experiencing? Because that I think will help in sort of the next step, which is number 2, identifying the cause, right? So then it becomes, all right, if I'm feeling, anxious, and then the next question naturally then flows into, well, why do, in this particular, instance, why do I feel the need to have to fit in, right? Like, it's fitting into this group. What does that mean? As opposed to, for example, fitting into another group, like these group of people, what do they mean to me? So sort of answering that basic question. And then step 3 is really exercising self-awareness though, right? And then it becomes, well, if I do indeed fit in, what does that say about me? How does that affect what I think about myself or how I see myself? How does that affect how I think other people see me, right? So kind of diving into like, first of all, like, it's great to want to fit in, but like, but why? And I think it's important to ask yourself those questions. And you might not always have the answers right away. I don't always do, but it's good to kind of start that thought process so that when you find yourself in these situations down the line, you're not just kind of reacting and kind of playing out any sort of patterns without any thought behind it. I think part of building and knowing our true self is to really be present in ourselves while we're navigating through the world. So we're always sort of in connection with ourselves, as we know like why we're doing certain things. I'm not just doing this because I've always done it this way. Oh, I actually have a reason. So I have a thoughtful response for myself also, right? And then step four, flowing into that, is connecting to your true self, right? Then it becomes, all right, so for example, I really want to fit into this moms group. Okay, so why? Like, what do I actually believe? Do my values actually align with them, right? Or for example, if I'm reading through a social post and like a certain post that somebody had an opinion about really affected me in some way, could be positive, could be negative, and then it could be like, well, this topic at hand, what they're talking about, like, why am I feeling this way? Is it because it aligns with how I feel? Is there something bothering because maybe either it's triggering something from my past, or is it actually touching upon a topic that I actually do feel strongly about, but maybe never had the chance to articulate, right? So those are, I think when we go back to that initial subject of leveraging our emotions, is a good way that our emotions are really a good way to kind of signal that something is going on, either positive or good, right? Sorry, positive or negative. And that we can use that as a signal to like, okay, let's slow down for a quick sec. Let me just think through this and think about why I'm doing these things. So I'm not just doing them like a robot, like a pre-programmed robot, right? And then step five, which is just making a decision, right? So based on sort of these things I kind of quickly go through my head, do I want to continue doing this? Do I actually jump in? Do I need some time for myself to reflect on it more? Or I decide like, yeah, I think I'm doing these for quote unquote the right reasons and I feel good about this. I'm not basing my self-worth on X, Y, and Z. So let me jump in. I think I do have something positive or constructive to contribute. So that was kind of a very long answer to that question, but I think it's a really good question because I think a lot of us do struggle with that. And I think we think about that either consciously or unconsciously all the time, right? Whether it be at work, I really want to fit in with, this group at work or this department at work. Like, why do I feel the need to have to do that? Do I not feel like I'm valued as a team member? Or maybe I don't feel like people think I'm as good as I want to be, or maybe they don't see all my strengths, right? So a lot of those things play together. And I think it's good to acknowledge them, even if it makes yourself feel uncomfortable. I think, the first step to doing any of this is to really be able to be honest with yourself. If you can't even be honest with yourself, it's going to be very difficult to be your true self and to be honest with other people, right? So I think that's part of being kind to yourself, is to allow yourself that safe space to have no judgment, be like, this is just who I am right now. This is where I am, and that's okay.
Absolutely. I mean, you've dropped so much knowledge just in that one question. And two things come to mind. I love that more and more, I mean, we still have a lot of work to do, but I love that more and more companies and organizations are realizing that language is important and
Oh
that we
yeah.
should be more inclusive in our languaging for all the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and instead of saying culture fit, there are more and more companies and organizations that are saying culture add, because otherwise we're playing the same damn game trying to be the same kind of thing when we need to show value, that we're different, we're all diverse, we are all, we all have our gifts that we can present, and to ask what are we missing instead of how can we make people fit in, right? That's
Right.
just changing the mindset on how to be a great leader, how to work on better teams, and how to influence yourself to start being more self-aware, self-confident, and all these things. So that's one thing that I just wanted to like throw some digital confetti at as you were speaking about that. It made me realize that we are on a collective level and also
Right.
individual level working towards that. We still have a lot more to
Yeah,
do,
no,
so keep
absolutely.
fighting
And
for that.
I think you bring a good point too. I think with us at work, and the reason why we use the Enneagram test is we don't want, I mean, obviously there's a work-life balance, but at the same time, we spend so much time at work. So how do we help our coworkers really get to their true self too, right? So it's not just about work. It's like, hey, like we appreciate who you are. We know kind of how you operate. So how do we communicate better with you so that the things that you're struggling with and you're working on, we can help encourage you in that way. So we really try to have that balance of, hey, we know it's work. However, we're in this together. We're still human beings. Like, how do we make this productive on a personal and professional level, for sure?
Beautifully said. And then the second thing that I wanted just to echo on, I love that you are speaking about, I'm hearing contemplation. To take a moment to think, is this what I want to be a part of? Why do I get this reaction to, instead of just reacting off the jump, let's go with the example of like seeing something on social media, which is
Mhm.
so alive right now. And so instead of just reacting and taking on other things, that's like, how did I get here? Taking a moment to contemplate and see why is this drawing my attention, and asking yourself questions and being okay to be a little uncomfortable with these responses that you might give yourself, honestly hoping that you can respond honestly, of course.
Right.
So I love that. I mean, that is, like, for me, hopefully lots of folks are listening to that. That is the key to not letting social media influence us, but letting us influence social media. So let's contemplate more before we jump the gun. Literally, too many bad things are happening because we're not thinking for ourselves, we're not contemplating, we're
Right.
absorbing what other people define to be success or to be self-empowerment or all these things. But if it doesn't mesh with you, then we need to take a pause, like you're saying. So thank you, Jen, for highlighting that pause.
Yes. Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to this next question here. What's the best way to get rid of pre-established social norms? How do
Mhm.
we unlearn them? I love this question. I'm really looking forward to your response.
Wow, that's a big question. um, well, I don't think the primary goal should be to get rid of established social norms, only because I don't really know all the social norms out there, and I don't want to give like absolute answers here and there. I'm sure there are some norms that are definitely bad, and some are probably good, and the bad ones are probably really ungrounded, right? So I think it kind of goes back to the pause that you were talking about, in that you know whatever we do, we take a pause to think about it, because I think what this question is really asking, instead of like, let's get rid of all the social norms out there, is what is the best way to identify when we're behaving purely based on some sort of pre-established and ingrained social norm or behavior, rather than on what we actually believe or identify with, right? Because maybe there are some social norms that do make sense. So I don't want to discount that. And I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but I'm sure it's maybe one or two are out there. So I think, as with any problem, I think, and kind of going back to that process, and the first step of solving it, or in this case identifying, or in the case to unlearn it, is to identify it, right? And I think the most natural and probably easily applied way of doing this is to really, again, monitor our emotions as we go through our days, as we scroll through social media, as we read the news, as we relate and interact with other people in our community, right? And I think it's really stopping and saying like, all right, I'm feeling a little weird, or maybe I'm feeling nothing or neutral. I just feel like jumping in. Like, all right, what am I reacting to in the moment, right? Is this something that I should think about before I proceed? And the thing is, we're not always going to do that perfectly, right? I think a lot of it is like, we need to give ourselves space and saying like, sometimes if I don't know how to react, that's okay. You can communicate, be like, I'm not sure how I feel about that, give me some time to think about it, right? And I think a lot of unlearning social norms is important in our development, because it also involves a lot of proactive activity on our part. I think one of the things I like to encourage people is, don't wait for other people to always feed you the information or tell you something is off. Like, sometimes if you're feeling something is off, like, do the needful, be proactive. Google is at our fingertips. Like, start doing your own research. Like, hey, that person reacted kind of weirdly to me. So what could they be reacting to? Maybe because of this topic I was talking about. Let me do some research. Is there some sort of context that I don't know about that maybe this person is reacting to? Let me educate myself a little bit more. So I think a lot of that is, nobody else can do this for you, right? Finding your true self, only you can do for yourself. So I think in all of that, like, don't wait for other people to kind of hand it to you on a silver platter. Like, do the hard work, do the research, ask the right questions, approach people and be like, hey, I understand that maybe I don't, maybe I offended you, or maybe they offended, me or whatever, but like, let's get to some common ground. Like, these are some of my questions. I'm not asking out of place because I'm trying to offend you, but I really don't know. I don't know what I don't know. So help me. Let's help each other. So I think that's really the first step in unlearning this and identifying what those norms are. We might not know all of them, right? So that's how I would answer that question.
Yes, beautifully answered. I would love to know if that person is on the line. If you would like for Jen to dive in deeper, you can write to me privately, or you can write in the group chat. Great questions so far, and I'm really thankful for you all for being transparent and being vulnerable in some of these questions. As we move forward, feel free to, encourage each other, because I know that some of these questions are dealing with fears. They're dealing with, things that we're holding inside, and maybe we feel like we can't express them. And so I think as long as we're doing this power of digital community thing that's just fallen into our laps, we might as well support each other in the meantime. Correct. So with that said, let's move on to this next question here. How do you confront trauma related fears that trigger physiological symptoms, for example, palpitations?
That's a really good question. Um, Well, I'm not a psychologist or therapist, but I have felt that too, definitely. And I think for me in particular, it has to do with panic attacks, which palpitations is definitely part of that. So I'm going to just share with you what I do. That's not to say that somebody else on the line or somebody else would have a better answer, but this I have found to be helpful. And I think the first, in terms of mentality, is I always give myself a way out. I never pressure myself, being kind to myself, to say, like, I have to stop feeling this way right now, or I have to solve this problem right now. I have to give an answer right away. I always tell myself, the likelihood of me dying in the situation, obviously certain context, but in this situation is probably none, right? Nothing really that bad can happen. Or if something not so pleasant happens, I can always come back to it and address it later. So I never put that pressure to be like, you have to be okay in this moment or else. I think that's probably one thing you can a burden you can relieve yourself of. So usually when I start feeling like a panic attack coming on, either palpitations or sweaty palms or whatever, I think the first thing I try to do, which I learned from doing meditation, is really actually labeling, like visually putting a label on what I'm experiencing. So basically what I'm actually doing is I'm breaking down this whole situation into smaller pieces that are more manageable for me. So for example, if these physical symptoms start to happen, I'll say, all right, I am having heart palpitations. I actually just say that. It seems kind of basic, but it is what it is. And then I'll visually kind of label that. All right, heart is pounding really fast. All right. And then I kind of put that on the side. And it's like, what else am I feeling? So it kind of draws you into yourself. You're really in tune with what your body is feeling. Then it could be like, all right, I think, my palms are sweaty. Okay, sweaty palms, put one side. Then I say, all right, I think all this is related to anxiety. And then I also put a label, anxiety. Like maybe it's probably more than that, but it helps me kind of compartmentalize and make things a little more simple. And I put that on the side. So basically, I think when I do that, it helps me not become overwhelmed and it helps ground me. So that's the first thing I usually do when I start experiencing these things. And just to let you guys know, in addition to, in work situations or sort of personal situations, I also used to do a lot of music performance. So stage fright is a huge thing. So these are also the steps that I took to do that. So yeah. So then the second thing I do is, again, back to the being kind to myself. I allow myself the experience. I don't try to squash the feeling, because it's kind of like with everything else. It's like the harder you try not to think about the monkey, you're going to think about the monkey, right? So I'm like, all right, you know what? It's okay. I'm having these feelings of anxiety and whatnot. I'm going to give myself 15 minutes. I'm just going to I'm going to lean into that feeling. Like, I'm just going to feel it in its full force, because it's got to have its day. Like it wants to be acknowledged. All right, I'm going to acknowledge it. So I let myself, quote unquote, go there. But the reason why I time box that is that sometimes when you go there, you can get stuck there and you don't want that. But if you give yourself kind of a mindset of, all right, 15 minutes, it's kind of like letting kids scream, like, all right, just get it out of your system. Like, just get on my system. If I need to cry, I'll cry, whatever it is, just get it out. And I do think that oftentimes will help me. This also, in that moment when I am going through that and allowing myself to feel that, I continue that practice of kind of almost like narrating what I'm feeling. I think it does two things. I think this is a good thing, but it almost gives you like a out of body experience in the way that it helps you kind of come from a more objective point of view. Like, all right, Jen is screaming her head off right now. All right, she's obviously not feeling well, or she's really crying, and I kind of narrate it. And I think when I narrate it, again, the situation becomes much more of fact-based. So I don't feel overwhelmed. Like, this is just what's going on, being very present in the moment, with myself. For example, like if you were there with a friend, right? When you're supporting a friend going through a hard time, you're just there to experience that painful moment with them. You don't try to change things, you're just there. So in essence, that's what you're doing for yourself in that moment. You're allowing yourself to be who you are in the moment with no judgment. And then the last part, after that 15 minutes or whatnot is up, that's when I start guiding myself out of that experience. And the way I think about it sometimes too is like, if this was my daughter, this is my friend, what would I tell them to do? So some practices, which if you go through meditation or if your therapist might give you, for example, in this situation would be like, all right, I'm going to take a really slow breath in for 7 counts and I'm going to breathe out really slowly for 12 counts and just keep on doing it. Just concentrate on the breathing. I concentrate on how I feel physically, concentrate on like when I breathe in, like I can feel like the breath going through my fingertips, my toes, whatever, just like how that really affects my body all in all. And that's not to say that it always works or you'll get to complete like, peaceful bliss by the end, but at least it's a measure of control that you have. Like, all right, maybe I don't have control of my emotions or my physical, symptoms in the beginning, but now I have a measure of it because I've been able to break it down. I've been able to watch myself sort of from like a third person point of view. And I think usually by that time, it's at least at the stage where I can step back and say, like, I need a moment. Like, I would like to revisit this another time, or to say, like, all right, I think I'm there, not quite there, but I feel okay to proceed, right? So at least you get to the point where your brain isn't so overwhelmed with like, oh my gosh, all these things are happening, and you're freaking out, where you can at least make a conscious decision to move forward or to not. And I think that's really all you can ask for yourself at that moment. Like you can't ask yourself to just be perfect or to be able to solve that problem on the spot, but at least you got to that point so that each time your trigger, each time this happens, you get a little bit better, and then eventually you can, hopefully all of us can have full mastery of it, which may or may not happen, but that's okay. We're moving in the right direction. So
Wow, I love this. This is so great. Again, self-awareness leading to self-regulation. So, and then a lot of times when I speak about the importance of emotional intelligence, I let people know first, it's not about suppressing emotions. It is not about controlling emotions. It's about just what you said, being with them, experiencing them, giving those boundaries so that you're not just lost in the sauce and you're drowning in your own emotions because, yeah, it's a huge part of our human experience, right? Why would we
for
want to
sure.
deny the emotions? Why would we want to hurt ourselves or hurt other people with how we experience them? So I love that you are, first things first, tune in, give yourself that time. And I totally don't think you're crazy by saying like narrate your
Yeah.
like the moment to moment, because what helps me also in those situations is realizing that I need to look at it from a macro level as well. I'm in the micro, I'm surrounded by all the noise, and to look at it from a macro level and see from a different perspective. Okay, Mariella's breathing quickly here. She's like walking around in circles, and then maybe some humor comes out of it and you can lighten up the situation.
Right. No, it's true. It's true. Yes.
Awesome. Great feedback on this. And I see some folks smiling and nodding their heads. So I know that you're not alone in the way that you're trying to, regulate and manage emotions. It's a huge task. Clearly not everyone can do it. And I think that as long as we're on the journey to figuring out how to do it, like you said, with grace, with curiosity, and just to try to be our best selves, that we can arrive
Right.
somewhere.
It definitely
That's
takes practice. So don't be hard on
absolutely.
yourself. You're not going to get it right every time, but you know, just try your
Absolutely.
best.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to this next question here. Again, if you hear your question, please let us know that this was your question in the chat box. If this is not your question and you want to chime in, please feel free to chime in. I would love to hear from you all. Okay, so this next question reads, how do you recognize when you aren't being brave or that you could have been braver when you might think you are already trying your best?
Mm-hmm. A great question. So again, like with everything else, this definitely takes practice. So I want to just address the last part of that, and I think the trying your best part. So for me personally, at any point in time, I think we can argue that we are, quote, doing our best, right? Given our current emotional state, mental capacity, personal maturity, etc. So I often don't like to think, and I know I caught myself saying this earlier, but I personally don't like to use doing our best too often, only because I'm in the camp where I feel like we can always do better, right? None of us are perfect, and none of us reach that highest level. Like it's a lifelong journey towards that goal. And also just another thing that I often remind myself too, that just because I have the capacity to do better or somebody asks me to do better, it doesn't mean that my current efforts aren't good enough or they're good. It just means like, hey, you have so much potential, so let's not limit ourselves, right? Like I did the best in that situation, but I can always do better. So tacking that on, I think is helpful. And I think it also bleeds into, the question of like, how can I be more brave, or if I'm not being brave. So I think this is hard, right, to do on the fly. But I think one thing, just speaking from my own personal experience again, one of the things that I struggle a lot with is being confrontational, and not confrontational in a way that like, hey, how come you did that? But even just bring up things that bother me, right? That's part of my thing that I've always struggled with is like, if something is bothering me, or if I don't like how somebody's doing something, or if somebody is crossing a boundary, I oftentimes have hangups in how to communicate that in a way that serves me while being respectful. Like, how do you strike that balance? How do you do it without fear? And that for me takes a lot of courage to do, which I've been working on. And my coworker Jen, who I think might also be on this call, also has been really helping me. Have good people in your lives, guys. If you have good people who will tell you how it is and are loving and cares about you, like that's golden. So definitely surround yourself with honest folks. Um, so yeah, so I guess identify when you need to be brave. I think the first part of that is kind of identifying what your end goal is, right? So for example, in my situation that I was just describing, my end goal is to communicate something clearly so we can come to an understanding, hopefully come to a solution or compromise. So I would say, I think this might be one of the slides up there that we can look at later. The goal really, when I ask myself what my end goal is like, is my goal to find a resolution to a problem? Is it to impact an important, is it to communicate an important and necessary information to somebody? Like, for example, like a performance review, like, I don't want to be mean, but like, I do need to tell you certain things, right? That takes bravery sometimes. It's not always the easiest thing to do. If is my end goal trying to defend or speak on behalf of someone else when I see something happen? Is it to, even more simply, is it just to learn something new, right? Is it doing something I've never done before, or is it something else altogether? So I think knowing in any situation that you're going in, that you feel maybe a little bit uneasy about, that you think might take a little more courage, it's like, I think the first thing is to settle down and think, what is the end goal? What am I trying to get out of this interaction? I think once you have that in mind, it's a little easier to stay focused and then to hopefully get to there in a more efficient way. Then the next thing I do, and this is probably more along the lines of like, when you're in the moment, sometimes I do a double check on myself, right? In terms of evaluating my current trajectory, right? Is the path, or is the thing I'm saying or doing actually different from what I normally do? And I ask myself that only because we're creatures of habit, right? We usually follow a certain pattern, and if they're not great patterns or the patterns we're trying to break, we're going to default to that. So I ask myself, is this what I normally do? My tendency is to, I try to pad sort of the hard things to say with really nice things, and then the actual message gets lost. Am I doing that in the moment? Am I trying to not make the other person feel bad too hard? Am I trying to evade trying to say what I actually have to say, right? So I ask myself that, am I doing anything different, or am I repeating the same behavior that I do every single time? Other questions I like to ask myself is if, if somebody's approaching me, with maybe something that's difficult to hear, and I need to be brave and kind of look at that and really evaluate that. It's like, am I trying to justify and rationalize my usual pattern behavior? Am I trying to defend myself? It's my first reaction, I just need to defend myself. Because that, while that is good in some cases, in many cases, it probably is more of a symptom of, oh, maybe there's something I need to look at in myself. Not to say that the person necessarily right, but I'm having this reaction. What does that say? Is there something I can do better or be better, right? Or am I also defaulting to, a normal pattern of behavior that maybe has been triggered by trauma? Maybe the situation is different. So all those things, lots of questions to ask, right? But it's good to kind of think about like, what my angle is what I'm doing currently, is that helping me go, move towards that end goal and achieve that end goal, or is it not? Basically, in a more simple way. And then I think the last part on that slide would be more sort of after the fact, right? Looking for different ways to approach. And some people are better at this than the other and doing it real time. I personally need to kind of evaluate this after the fact, and kind of looking back and evaluating how maybe that whole conversation went, or how that interaction went, and I think about like, well, you know, is there a different approach I can take that will help me change my perspective or help me feel more brave or help me look at it from a point of view that's going to help me move past my fears, because it's like, oh, it's actually just this. It's actually not what I thought it was, right? So, and I kind of divided here into 3 different sections. The first one being, how can I approach it differently in terms of my actions and behavior? Like, what can I do better next time? Is there something I could have said more clearly? Could I have, acknowledged somebody's feelings better or more upfront so they know that I understand them? Could I have been more empathetic, right? And what ways can I take more initiative to help myself or others? Can I ask better questions, right? Um, and then the other things I ask myself, thoughts and beliefs about myself, right? Can I touch upon that? Like, am I reacting or approaching this problem this way because I'm only focused on defending myself, or is this triggering something else that I haven't really dealt with, like from my past? Like maybe I'm so used to people talking down at me, so I naturally, will answer a question this way when somebody asks me something in this tone, right? So while we can't always change how other people approach us, we can kind of change sort of the narrative in our mind so that we can approach it from a healthier point of view for ourselves, right? And then thoughts and beliefs about others. And I think this is important for me, for self growth, is like, oh, am I putting aside my own assumptions about other people? Like, it can't just be all about me. Like, then I kind of step aside. It's like, well, am I really actually understanding the other person? Am I actually listening to understand them? Maybe they do have a valid reason. And why am I struggling to not want to listen to them and just want to say my part? So I always try to take a step back and okay, it's not all about me. There is another person. They are also another person on a journey with a soul, with opinions, with their background. So I try to be mindful of that, right? And then the second part is really, because I'm not always good at necessarily figuring out what my biases are. So I think a good question to ask is like, am I willing to see somebody for who they are based on their actions, right? And not just their words, because words can mean nothing, but it's really your actions that count. Like, based on what I've seen from them, like, let me understand them right now based on what they've shown me, not what society has told me, not what others have told me, but like, let me see them for who they are. So am I willing to do that? I'm willing to open my eyes to that instead of coming in with all these preconceived notions and then behaving and reacting in that way, which may not be correct. My assumptions could very well be wrong. So I think I don't know if I totally answered the question, but I think in being brave, a lot of it, back to the beginning, is really being self-aware, knowing what our goals are, really evaluating where we are, being honest with ourselves. Like, is what I'm doing the same thing I've always been doing? Am I really making the right assumptions? Or am I making wrong assumptions? Am I not asking the right questions? Am I just here for myself, or am I with other people? Like, being brave really asks you to be vulnerable, right? With yourself, right? And also to let others be vulnerable in a safe space with you so you guys can be brave together. So,
I love this. I love that you've mapped this out so beautifully. Just to dive in a little deeper, just to get on some relevant issues that are happening in the world. How can we be brave when there's so much in social injustice? All the isms, sexism, racism, all the isms that we're hopefully more and more folks will be figuring out how to navigate those waters and bring things back
mhm.
to, a balance so that we are taking care of each other, taking care of ourselves and each other. How can someone right now in this moment who is either personally being affected or feels like they're just looking behind a glass and they can't really go outside because of the circumstances to do physical
Mhm.
work, how can we be brave right now during these times when we're seeing so much? I mean, because of course, social media as well as putting it right in our face,
Right.
so much social injustice. Can you give us just like a quick something we can do right now from this
Yeah.
moment?
I mean, I think it depends on which side you're coming in from, right? So for example, if you are the person who you're feeling like you're the one being in a way persecuted, right? I think that's a different type of bravery than maybe somebody who's coming in who's not being persecuted. Like, how, I don't even know, am I doing something wrong? So there's kind of two sides to that. So I think I'll take one at a time. So I think from the side of like being the one who you're feeling like you can't go outside because you're afraid of what might happen to you. Um, you know, that's a tough one because I struggle with that too a little bit, and I think we all do to some extent. But I think a lot of that is one, um, again, taking the time to acknowledge, I am scared. These are the reasons why. And then I think this is where I think social media and actually, connecting with others is important. I think having a community, right? I think one of the good things about this is even if you dive into the whole thread of comments, like you can kind of pick out like, all right, what are people saying? You know, I'm scared, but what are other people saying about the situation? Some comments obviously aren't constructive, and some are like, oh, maybe they have this preconceived notion of who I really am or who my group of people really am, right? And not to say that that's correct, but then at least you know kind of who you're dealing with, right? Are these people obviously have not been educated, or maybe they don't know too much about my culture, or they don't know too much about what people in my group have gone through. So I think even if you can't solve that issue right from the beginning, just understanding like what the issue is helpful. And I think another thing that may be helpful is not necessarily villainizing everybody, right? Sometimes there are people out there, and again, I think people are quote more brave when they're behind the screens. They'll, trolls are like that a lot of the times than when they're actually in person, right? So a lot of times it's like, all right, you know, these people are wrong in thinking this way, or I feel like they definitely have the wrong assumptions or have the wrong facts. But if you see it as like these people just don't have the right information, I think make not seeing them as like, oh my gosh, everybody's going to hurt me, right? And not kind of having a blanket statement on that, and just saying like, okay, certain people have these preconceived notions, certain people have this background, and kind of in a way, I think the first step is accepting like there's going to be people like that, right? I can't change that right away, and that's okay. We can get there, but you can't take on the whole world by yourself. And I think sometimes you can get really overwhelmed, and that makes you kind of stay and say like, I can't live my life because everybody's out to get me. And I think when we start using phrases like everybody, always, never, like even in personal relations, that's when it gets dangerous, because then you kind of box yourself in. So I think a good way to start is like, all right, acknowledging the fact there are going to be people who are going to be mean. There are going to be people who are going to say things that are really inappropriate. There are instances where it's going to be scary. That's part of life. And I'm acknowledging it, not to say it's okay, but I'm acknowledging it, right? So I think that's usually the first step. And then the second step is, you kind of do have to keep on going. But I think a lot of it is, looking for ways to stand up for other people. So if you see it, the same thing that happened to you happen to someone else, or you see it starting to happen, like what can you do to kind of interject yourself in a way that's like, even if it's not to change somebody's mind, because we can't make anybody change their minds, but to be a voice, to be like, I'm here, I understand what you're going through, other people may not, but then you start building that connection, even if you don't see them face to face. The fact that other people, like even for yourself, if you know that, oh, other people have experienced the same thing, I'm not the only one, the power of knowing you're not alone, I think is very powerful in itself, right? And I would just say start from there. I don't know, because there's so many different issues out there. I don't want to put a blanket thing because it won't necessarily work for every context. But I think just kind of acknowledging the facts and the reality, right? I think a lot of times where we can kind of get stuck is we have this ideal version of how we like things to be, which is a good goal to aim for. But I think we always have to bring ourselves back to, okay, but reality wise, this is what we actually can do. We're not going to be able to get there right away. And then if you keep on thinking like it needs to be this ideal way right away, I think not only do you set yourself up for disappointment, and frustration, but it also becomes really overwhelming. And then you can't break it down into more actionable steps, right? So in that way, I think it's good to have a little bit of both, but to always kind of bring it down to the reality is there are always going to be people who don't like you, and we have to accept that. But then how do I make an effort to help those who may be struggling, having the same challenges, to feel that they are not alone? How do I support them? I think as you grow that network, and as your people will come, and that network will grow bigger and grow stronger. So it is a slow process, but at least it's progress. And then I would say, from the other point of view, people who may be like, oh my gosh, I don't want to say anything wrong. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't want to say anything wrong. Like, how do I be brave and manage situations when I interact with certain people? I don't want to offend them, whatever. I think to that, I think the bravery part comes with looking to yourself, be like, okay, do I actually have these thoughts? It's okay if I do, because then I know what to fix. Don't know what you can't fix what you don't know, right? And I think the second part where I actually encourage some people who I've come to interact with is like, don't be afraid to ask questions, or in tandem, do your own research, right? But if you have questions, like ask in a respectful way. It's like, hey, I'm really trying to educate myself. I've read up on X, Y, and Z, but I'm still not really clear. Can you help me understand so that I can better support you? And I think it's kind of that vulnerability and saying like, hey, I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm doing this right. I would really like to help. Would you be willing to help me? Right. But I think in tandem, like also do your own research so you don't put the burden of that education on the other person, but you're showing them like, I'm making an effort, help me fill in the gaps. And I think that in itself, you're acknowledging where your weaknesses are or where your pitfalls might be. And I think that does take a lot of bravery. And I think that's a good step. And I think as you take one step to be brave and you realize, hey, it wasn't so bad, then it helps you the next time around, right? Maybe it's not always the best feedback. Maybe some people are like, no way, I don't want to spend time doing this. It's not my thing. But that's okay, because one person doesn't mean everybody's like that. So I think it's important not to put blanket statements on people all around. That's how stereotypes start. It's just like, again, seeing people for who they are based on who they are showing themselves to be through their actions and not through what other people say they are, right? And I think that is a good start to being brave and setting the stage for a healthy interaction like that.
Yes, hopefully more and more of us will find that bravery that is either lying dormant inside or just knocking at our doors and we're just not sure how to approach it because, yeah, it can be uncomfortable. We have to ask ourselves lots of questions. Like you said, we have to be curious and let that curiosity take us to a place where we can be more empowered and to share that with others, lift other voices and things like that. And I know I threw you a really tough
No, that's
follow-up
okay.
question, but I really appreciate your response because I think that we need to hear how we're all getting through this, and I would love to hear from our live callers. Is there anything that you have found helpful during these crazy times that have given you a source of inspiration for bravery? And as you all are writing down in the chat box, actually, Jennifer, I'd love to ask you that because this was submitted
Mm-hmm.
offline. From where do you get your bravery, and
Mm.
what's your source of inspiration when you need it?
Okay, good question. Let me think. So I think for myself, it's keeping what I know of my true self to be at the moment, right? So, for example, like in the case of interpersonal relationships, and I think I touched upon this a little bit earlier, like I'm really afraid, and it sounds really silly coming out of my mouth, but I'm really afraid to say things like no to like my significant other because I'm really afraid of rejection, right? But I also know that in that moment, that maybe what they're asking me to do it really goes against what I believe or what type of person I want to be, right? So then I keep so I acknowledge, all right, this is where I am, this is what I'm afraid of. What I would like my true self to be is somebody who really, really sticks to their values and doesn't compromise on certain things, right? So in service of what I know my true self to be and my potential as a person that I want to become, I need to say no and to just trust that my groundedness will help me navigate whatever outcome or reaction that person will have, even if it is rejection, right? So I think it's, again, keeping that goal in mind. It's like in the end, I'm responsible for my own actions. I'm responsible for who I turn out to be. So I can't let that fear or let what another person's challenges or issues and whatnot really control that, because then I relinquish control, and that's not good, right?
Absolutely.
And I think also along the lines, the way I think about it too is when I'm being brave, I'm actually also inviting that other person to be brave alongside of me, because whatever reaction they have, they get an opportunity to like reflect on their own reaction in themselves and to in a way be better, right? So I think that's also, when I think about it that way, it's like, oh, it's a mutual chance of growth. Whether or not they take it, that's on them. But at least I'm providing the opportunity. Otherwise, I'm always it's kind of like you're enabling them to never have that chance to even explore that side of them, or to have that question be like, oh, maybe I'm not responding well. Maybe there's something I need to look into myself. So yeah. So, and I guess the other part of being brave sometimes doesn't apply to all situations, is honestly the concept of YOLO. I think this probably like applies more to things like physical things, that like trying out new things, that obviously not things that are going to like be super dangerous, but like I'm really afraid of heights, like, but you know what? I'm going to be brave and learn how to ski, even though like it scares me, because I don't want to be a person who's always confounded by fears. I want to experience things. So I'll do it in a safe way, but so a little bit of that too. But yeah.
I love that. I love that. I actually literally climbed one of the highest, probably the highest mountains I've ever climbed in my life, and realized I have vertigo. Like, but at the top, I was like, okay, This is the top for me. Y'all can keep going, but I'm gonna sit
Yeah.
down right here.
Yeah.
But then I kept reflecting, like, okay, good. I want to do it again. That bravery of like, okay, I got through it. I thought I wasn't gonna make it, and also just to your point, like keep people who support you around you. If I had gone by myself, I would not have made it to the top.
For
It was
sure. For
totally
sure.
like folks saying, like, no, we're not gonna leave you here. No, you cannot go back. Come along with us. And
Right.
that's just a great visual to put into this kind of work too. That it's a long journey. This is a marathon, and it's better
Mhm.
when we're together. It might sound cheesy, but it's totally real. And if you don't
Yeah.
know, go try a hike a mountain by yourself. Don't do that. Do it with friends who can
Well,
support
it's
you.
also kind of like a little bit of humor in there too. It's like, hey, I
Yeah.
might find out I really suck at this, and that's okay. But at least I give it a try. Now I know, right?
Yeah,
So it's like
totally.
it's almost like not taking yourself too seriously. But the thing is, if you never try, then you never know. You may be missing out, and you only have one life, so you might as well go for it. It could be an adventure, and somewhere somehow you'll get through it and learn something new about yourself. So there's no downside to that, from my perspective.
Absolutely. Well, time has flown. We have about 5 minutes left. So I would love to see if anyone wants to hop off mute in the last couple of minutes and voice their reflection or question. I'll hold for a light pause to see if someone would like to hop off mute.
I have
All
a question
right.
for you,
Yes,
Jennifer.
go for it. Go for it,
Yes.
Gabby.
So I think it's pretty hard because, as people, we really feed off of everyone else's emotions. And like now that we're
Mhm.
mostly virtual, tone, especially during emails, always gets misconstrued. You're looking for eye contact. So maybe they don't even mean to like avoid looking at the camera, but when people
Mhm.
tend to get defensive, you can see them like averting eye contact. So it's been hard because you talk about like trying not to offend others, but sometimes when you're being as real as you can be and straightforward, they still take it really constructively. So I feel like there are a lot of barriers right now amidst this virtual world too, to try to really connect with one another. And I just
Yep.
wanted to see how you're combating that, because I mean, I can be as self-aware as possible, but when I'm talking to someone, I can see that they're looking like they're disinterested, or they're
Mhm.
reacting really defensively. I can say something like, hey, like I didn't mean to for you to take that the wrong way, but can you help me
Mhm.
understand like why you're reacting that way? And sometimes they're not even ready to open up like right in that moment. So I just wanted to ask that of you.
No, that's actually a very, very good question. And so with Shoot, the company that I working in right now, we've always been pretty much 100% remote. So I totally hear you on that. We have people from all over the U.S. and Canada and what else. So that is actually something we struggle with a little bit, but I think we kind of figured it out. And the CEO Jen is actually extremely good at this. So the way we approach things like this, and I think you actually hit upon a lot of really good things. I can tell, like even when you're talking, you're observing how they're reacting, right? So I think a lot of times, again, the Enneagram test really helps. A lot of times when we know like kind of what the tendencies are, we'll speak to that, right? So for example, if we start seeing somebody sort of like, look around or seem a little bit insecure, we'll kind of stop and say like, hey, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, right? And I want you to know that this is a safe space. So what about this is making you feel uncomfortable? So you kind of like open the floor to them and be like, okay, let's stop talking about what we're talking about. Let's just talk a little bit about what you're feeling. What are you experiencing? Do you have any anxiety that you're feeling right now? Let us help you put that away, put that to bed, so that you can actually focus on whatever we are talking about. And I think a lot of times as you get to know people and as you ask these questions, and they may or may not be able to come up with it right away. Sometimes you say like, hey, that's okay. Why don't we end the conversation for now? Why don't you think about it just for a little bit. Let's come back in like 10 to 15 minutes and then let's talk about, like, there's no wrong answer, but like part of remote, you're going to have to do a little bit more emotional labor in that way, right? You really need to get people to open up, which I think is kind of one of the benefits of kind of this pandemic, is that people are starting to have to communicate better, have to watch their tone better, have to be really vigilant about how people are reacting, because you're no longer in person to do it. So you're going to have to be like extra vigilant, right? So that's usually how we approach that. And then one thing we try to do too is to remind them, it's like, hey, I know this, or we caveat it with like, hey, what I'm about to tell you, it's you might take it personally. It's not meant to be personal, but it might feel that way. And it's okay if you feel that way. Let us know if you want us to stop. But we have some notes about ways that we would like you to improve, because we see that this will really help bring you to the next level. And we're going to say it in a way that's directly, so it's really clear, so there's no misunderstanding. If at any point something doesn't sound quite right, or you have a feeling about it, just stop us and we can talk through it, right? And I think the most important part of that is that for you as a person doing that kind of guidance is to not make sure that you don't get into a place where you become abusive or manipulative. It's always like your tone is always calm, right? You're always like, all right, if I need time, be like, all right, thank you for sharing how you're experiencing. I'm not sure how to respond. Like being honest, right? I'm not even sure how to respond to this. Why don't we both take some time off and let's think about how to best approach this so we can come up with a solution, right? So it's kind of also reminding them like our end goal isn't to punish you, isn't to make you feel bad. Our end goal is to actually find a better way to do X, Y, and Z so our business can run better. So whatever we need to do in service of that, let's do that, right? So a lot of it is being really communicative, it's being professional, but not to the point where you're like trying to sugarcoat everything. It's being really direct so people know what they're dealing with. People know what you're actually thinking. I think part of the fear sometimes comes with like, oh, I don't really know what she's thinking. Maybe she's mad at me. Maybe she's not. So to kind of address that, it's like, this is what I'm feeling now. Like, I'm not upset. I'm just trying to, go through my list so that I make sure I get what I need to communicate out so that you understand exactly what our expectations are so that you're not blindsided later, be like, hey, how come you didn't do this? Well, you didn't tell me, right? Just so that everything is super, super duper clear. And likewise, if they have issues with us, we try to model that and be like, we're not going to be defensive. Like, let's think about that. Maybe there is something we can do better, right? So it's a lot of interplay. It's a lot of, like you said, observing what's happening, asking good questions, making sure people are reminded that, it's a safe space to kind of, take that time, to really share.
Yes. Yes, what a beautiful way to end this conversation. Thank you, Gabby, for that thoughtful question. Thank you, Jen, for diving into these questions. I know we didn't get to all of the questions, and I see we've got some folks writing in the chat box. So, Jen, let us know how folks can connect with you after we end this conversation so that they can support the great work you're doing, or maybe, continue to ask you questions offline.
Sure. Probably the best way I would say is through email, which let me find my chat box and I can put that in. Unless there's a way you can include that.
Yeah, we can include that in the rewatch email.
Okay.
And then for those folks who are watching this video on YouTube or later on Power to Fly, you can just voice the email so that folks can write it down as well.
Mm-hmm. It's basically jenniferye@shoot.com, but spelling wise, it's probably best to prefer. Yeah, for sure. I would, definitely answer any other questions that you guys may have. These are very, very dense topics, so you could talk days and days about these things. So
yes. Well, Jen, I really appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. I know we went a little over time, but this is such an important issue and an important conversation. I love that we're having a safe space, safe digital space, as Jen was saying. So please try to repeat this and echo this out wherever you are working, wherever you are exchanging ideas. Rewatch this, share with your friends and family. And we'd love to see you on the next Chat and Learn. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye. Thank you.